You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Thank you so much for joining me here today on this Wellness and Weight Loss Wednesday, where I want to cover the important topic of whether you are battling tiredness and fatigue or if you truly have chronic fatigue syndrome. So, just looking at my own past, I can say 20 plus years ago, there was no medical doctor that really believed in, from a conventional medicine standpoint, anything to do with chronic fatigue syndrome. They just thought it was a made-up disease. They thought it was all in your head. And simply, they just brushed you aside, saying that, okay, well, you're going to have to get some type of counseling for this. There's no medication. There's nothing we can do for you. We just need you to kind of be on your way. And that's what I was told. And that's because, for the most part, my blood work looked fine. Again, later we tested it and we actually looked for something called Addison's disease. And I actually truly had Addison's disease, and I was put on certain types of medication for that. But what I want to explain to you today is that now, 20 plus years later, we know that chronic fatigue syndrome is real, that it does exist, and that there are many different facets and branches to that, meaning that there are offshoots called myalgic encephalomyelitis or encephalomyelopathy. We have fibromyalgia, and we have other offshoots all to do with fatigue, pain, generally feeling run down, brain fog in general, and over full body inflammation or flu-like symptoms. And these are things I experienced. I experienced them for many, many years. And unfortunately, conventional medicine was not the place to look. It's still not the place to look today for how to heal those specific diseases of the body. But at least now they believe it, because eventually, then we start to look at more and more lab tests. And conventional medicine is like, okay, we can lab test for it, so okay, we believe it exists. But the problem is it's always existed. It's existed for thousands of years. We see it in traditional Chinese medicine. We see it in Ayurvedic medicine. And what they did for people dealing with this Vata-based disorder, or in other types of terminology, this overall full body fatigue or exhaustion. And again, I speak about this in my book, The Rain Barrel Effect, because what I'd like to let people know is that whether you have just overall fatigue, and I'm going to ask you a question that's going to help you be able to answer this, or whether you have chronic fatigue syndrome, CFS, and again, there's different levels to this as well, because it's no longer just chronic fatigue. There's also what I was later diagnosed with, and that's chronic fatigue immune dysfunction. And that, to me, made a lot of sense, meaning like, yes, I had Addison's disease, which is the inability to produce cortisol. And essentially, you do a stim test. I won't go through all of that today. I've spoken about it in the past. And you get to see if your body's actually producing cortisol or not. And mine failed. Mine just did not produce cortisol after these specific injections. So one thing too is that I had immune dysfunction, meaning that I had very, very high levels of inflammatory based immune dysfunction, more on the, although, I had both branches off, the Th1 versus Th2. And that was, my body was not regulating its immune system very well, meaning that I would react to many, many environmental based things, and dust and mold and pollen and grass and all those different types of things. But I was not able to fight off the common cold. I was not able to fight off sinus infections, things like that. So I had a very inflamed immune system and nervous system. And at the same time, one part of it was not as strong as it should be, meaning like my secretory IgA levels were just plummeted. They were 0 when I tested on a lab test. And of course, if you want to have a good immune system from the outer world, you want those secretory IgA levels to actually be elevated at the appropriate times. So what I'm looking at today is I say, how can I help people that come in with fatigue? How can I help people that truly have chronic fatigue syndrome, or they have myalgic encephalomyelitis, or they have some type of immune dysfunction? And I know that this is not a straightforward answer. Well, I do. And what I ask them first off the bat is this. So this is the first question I want you to ask yourself. And again, so I want you to know that I believe you, and that there are tens of thousands of other practitioners in the world that believe you as well. We know that you're suffering from flu-like symptoms. We know you're suffering from fatigue. We know you're suffering from brain fog, and really the inability to not be able to get out there and participate in the world. A lot of people need to stop their job, and they're bedridden, a lot of people. And I know what that's like. I was bedridden for many, many months. And literally just getting out of bed, walking downstairs to just try to grab a little bit of food was all my body could handle. I'll go into this in the future as well. But what I was able to do was muster up enough energy to go downstairs, get a little bit of food, and then that totally wiped me out. So my body had enough energy to do that and then wiped out. And then I have to lie back down and get a little bit more energy and then hopefully be able to go downstairs a little later. That was my days. I mean, those were my days, and they were some really dark times. That is not something that, of course, I ever want to repeat. And I don't want anyone to have to go through that. I mean, that's the truth. And so what we tell people is this. The first question is this. Are you suffering from being tired, or do you truly have chronic fatigue syndrome? And this is the question. I ask them, if you are going Monday through Friday and you're exhausted from, kids waking you up or, not getting enough sleep because of work or whatever it is, at the end of the weekend, if you're able to get more sleep, do you feel a little bit more rejuvenated? And if the answer is yes, then we're probably not dealing with a deep level of chronic fatigue. It can be there, but we're probably not dealing with a deep level of chronic fatigue. We're dealing with someone who's highly stressed. Body's reaction to it's in the resistance stage of what we'll call adrenal fatigue, but it's not in adrenal fatigue or chronic fatigue syndrome. What I also ask them is this. When you go away after a week's vacation, do you feel better? Do you feel more rested? Do you feel more rejuvenated? And if the answer is yes, then most likely you're dealing with fatigue, and again, the resistance stage of adrenal fatigue, but not truly chronic fatigue syndrome. And of course, there are many levels to this, right? Meaning like, okay, you don't do well just with 3 days off, but if you had a week's vacation, then you start to recover. These are all levels of fatigue within the body. And I don't think that I hate classifying things with names. I really do, meaning like chronic fatigue syndrome. And I of course, I don't agree with conventional medicine at all, but chronic fatigue syndrome itself doesn't really denote anything except you have a collection of symptoms that we're going to call a disease, right? A dis-ease of the body. And I agree, but really chronic fatigue syndrome, although I really begged and hoped for many years to be given some type of diagnosis. And when I was later diagnosed with Addison's disease, and they said, okay, well, if you have Addison's disease, maybe you have blood sugar issues. And then they tested me for blood sugar issues. And then I had type 2 diabetes. And they said, okay, it looks like, you have some joint issues and some joint pain. Why don't we test you for rheumatoid arthritis? And then I would come up high on an RA factor and ANA for rheumatoid arthritis. So I had rheumatoid arthritis. And it's kind of like, well, let's see what else is wrong. So it started with my functional medicine doctor actually running some lab work. And that's why I ask you this is like, we can kind of get a basis point by me asking you, do you feel better after a good night's sleep or a weekend of sleep? And if the answer is yes, okay, you're still kind of moving down the rabbit hole of adrenal fatigue-based issues, but we don't know at what level. And that's why, to really be able to diagnose, and again, I have that in air quotes because as a naturopath, as a natural health practitioner, I do not diagnose disease and I don't treat disease, and many, many reasons for that. One, it's not legal. And the second is that I don't believe in it. Meaning that if I let you and I allow you to believe that you have a disease, I'm giving you a way out. I'm giving you a name that you can give your set of symptoms that allows you to fall back on it and allows you then to not go on to live the life that you truly deserve to live. And I will not allow you to do that because I myself was there for many years. And I refuse to give people that crutch no matter how much they needed at the time in order to allow themselves to placate their position to stay where they are. I won't allow that because what happens is you're going to lose years of your life with that mentality. And I know, and it's true, right? It's true. You do have these serious issues. They are there. I'm not going to deny them. I'm not going to deny them. But what I'm saying to you right now is because you may have been given a name of a disease, it's allowing you to sit back, you can take the medication maybe like I did, mask the current symptoms that you have, and then either go on with life or you sit back and you just say, you know what? I can't do sports. I can't go to the gym. I'm stuck with all this weight on my body. I can't exercise. I can't really eat that well because I can't handle these specific foods. And you just step back and you say, it's because I suffer from this disease. And I go online and I watch videos and I see all these things on social media and people see, they're like CFS and meaning chronic fatigue syndrome and ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis sufferer or victim, which is even worse because it's like the disease owns you. And I don't want to turn this into a Mindset and Motivation Monday, which again, I've spoken about these things before, but it's all true. What I want you to understand is you are not the victim of these diseases. They happen to you. It's not ideal. I wish I didn't necessarily have them, but now I can look back many years later and actually see that they're a blessing. Now this has turned into my life's work. And for you, it could turn into potentially your life's work as well. Sharing your story with others, at least helping people in your community. And how great would that be? Because remember, to be happy is to be serving. To be serving is to actually share something that you've discovered in your life with others. It automatically raises your energetic level, your vibratory level. But we'll talk about that another day. Right now is what I want to do is I want to help you overcome this fatigue in general, this tiredness in general. And certainly if you're someone dealing with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia or ME or any of these things, CFIDS, which is the chronic fatigue immune dysfunction syndrome. So what I want you to do is I want you to forget about that name for a moment and understand that there's an underlying root cause to all of these things. Now, the hard part about chronic fatigue, and I'm not going to say it's easy, the hard part about chronic fatigue is that it can come from anywhere. Meaning like it can come from veterans of war, from dealing with that level of stress in war and post-traumatic stress disorder. And it can come from gut-based issues, meaning like you could be someone like myself and took 3,000 capsules of antibiotics for skin-based issues. And we just had the sniffles and our doctor would give us a Z-Pack. It come from that. So I had candida overgrowth and I had SIBO. It can come from just being a stressed out person. All of those things matter. It can come from heavy metals. It can come, like you name it. It could lead to chronic fatigue. And why? Here's why. Your body suffers from deficiencies, right? Well, what are some of the deficiencies that could lead to chronic fatigue? Well, certainly electrolyte deficiency, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium. How many people with chronic fatigue suffer from feeling lightheaded upon standing? They feel weak. Well, a lot of times that's from a sodium-based or at least a functional sodium-based deficiency, right? And that's now, again, I know that this is lost after a lot of doctors leave medical school, and I understand because you're not using that in your practice. But if you really study and you understand how the body works, you can understand that when someone's going through stress, they're going to ramp up their levels of cortisol. And as they're ramping up their glucocorticoids is what it's called, the body also ramps up other hormones. And initially, it ramps up DHEA and testosterone. Again, that can affect women and certainly with PCOS. But it ramps up another hormone, and that's called aldosterone. And aldosterone, when ramped up, actually signals, again, in the beginning, sodium retention to increase that blood pressure. And then obviously a greater release of sodium as well. So we have a depletion of aldosterone as someone enters into deeper levels of chronic fatigue syndrome. If we have lower levels of aldosterone, we're not going to have the same retention or normal distribution of sodium in the cells. That means there's less sodium to be used in the blood, less in the cells. And potassium and sodium can't speak the same language, meaning that sodium and potassium are antagonists, but they work on the same mechanism. And you need a really good cell signaling and cell membrane signals for the cells to communicate to allow sodium and potassium to enter and leave the cell through a process called osmosis. It's really, really important in terms of energy utilization within the cells. And I know a lot of people talk about mitochondrial dysfunction and chronic fatigue, but I'm telling you, you can run labs and you can look at mitochondrial dysfunction, and I agree with it, and it's there. And they say, okay, well, really what you need is more malate. You need more malic acid. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you a specific form of magnesium attached to malate. Well, great. Okay, fine. But no one's ever going to recover from chronic fatigue by simply giving them more malate because that's not an underlying root cause. You're looking at the symptoms, and too many functional medicine doctors and practitioners right now, and again, it's not their fault. They're being taught to look at all these intricacies, which are great, but they don't hold the answer. And the reason they don't hold the answer is because they're not foundational. And if you don't work with foundational-based medicine, you're not going to be able to help people heal in the long term. You can keep replacing things like coenzyme Q10 and malic acid and B12. But I'm telling you right now, anyone with true chronic fatigue-based issues, and they're really run down, will never recover with that. I tried it. I've seen people use it in practice. They then come to us, when things aren't working. So I get to see these things. And the reason is that B12 needs to work with all of its partners. Sure, B12 is amazing. But what about B6 and folate? And what about other methylation and inflammation-based issues that are depleting your body of B12 in the first place? Or what about weak digestion? What about low levels of hydrochloric acid that are allowing you to break down the food in the first place? Because if you did, you would have been able to extract the B12. So we're going to use B12 for the rest of your life? Or should we get you to better extract the nutrition from your food? Well, I'd rather do both. Prevent you from suffering in the short term, but in the long term, get you to break down your food better, right? So what I'm trying to show you is that the body at a foundational level needs to be healed. This is why it didn't get better for almost a decade, because although I was working with phenomenal functional medicine doctors, they taught me about saliva hormone testing. They taught me about food sensitivity testing. They taught me about inflammation. They taught me about all these great things. And I'm forever grateful. What they didn't teach me was what my final mentor taught me, Dr. Pete. She said this. She said, Steve, you have to understand that there are levels to this, that you have to understand that all of these things can be great, but what you're not looking at is how your body's functioning right now. Meaning, like, you need to look at body type. You need to look at where your body's at in space. And so then with myself, with that obsessive-based personality, and it was even more obsessive back then with OCD and, you name it, it was just digging into this as deep as I could. And that at some points it was too deep. Meaning, like, I was learning things that I had no business learning because I wasn't ready for it, right? And sometimes I feel like that's a lot of us out there. We're learning about all of these tidbits, which are great, but we don't look at them in the overall context. So now, many years later, I have context. So when someone comes in, what looks like a very, very complicated case on the outside isn't necessarily that complicated because I wash away, I peel back the onion, and I get to look at what really matters. And so what I do is this. Like, I have something called the Dr. Cabral Big Five. It's 5 lab tests that I like to run. But what if you can't afford all 5 lab tests? I completely understand that. If you're someone dealing with chronic fatigue, like, what are the ones that you could do right now to start to get better? Well, if you've never run your thyroid adrenal hormone test, that's a place to start, right? Because you actually want to look at, does your body produce cortisol, yes or no? Like, that's the bottom line, yes or no? Because if it does produce cortisol and you're fatigued, well, you can say, okay, there's a lot of other factors then going in. Nutritional deficiencies, poor digestion. I'll get to that in a moment. But it's not to do with the production of glucocorticoids. It's not the production of that. Because I'm looking at this lab, I see that you produce the levels. Okay, now we might have a dysfunctional HPA axis. That's the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. Now that might be dysfunctional. Here's what I mean by that. And again, I talk about this in my book. My book, by the way, is my life's work. And it's on Amazon. I don't even know how much they sell it for. All profits go to charity, 100% of all profits. But if you read the book, you understand the levels to this. And it's my way of paying this forward. All the information I've learned, I want you to have. That's the bottom line. But I do teach this on all the podcasts. So if you're someone who just doesn't like to read or, doesn't want to buy the book, that's okay. I teach in the podcast. Well, what I want you to have is kind of like your get well guide. And I really want people to share that information with others. But here's the deal. You can have what's called the dysfunctional HPA axis. So a lot of people, as they're in levels to adrenal fatigue, okay, there are actually 10 levels. I'll teach them in the future. But right now, you only need to worry about 3. The alarm stage, the resistance stage, and then the burnt out stage, the adrenal fatigue. So here's what happens, though. During that resistance stage, a lot of times people can have low AM cortisol, all right, low morning cortisol, all right? So they're tired upon waking, and they actually start to get more energy as the day goes on, and then they can't fall asleep at night. So now they can't fall asleep at night, they don't get into a deep level of sleep, which means they can't rejuvenate their body. They actually produce higher levels of cortisol in the evening. This is called a broken or diurnal or dysfunctional diurnal rhythm, which means that the body should have more energy, more stress hormone production in the morning, and then less towards the evening. This is normal. This is a normal human diurnal rhythm. If that is broken, we need to fix that first. And that is not difficult to fix, believe it or not. That takes anywhere from usually 6 weeks maximum to really, I would say 12 weeks maximum to fix that. And then you're on your road to recovery because your body's back in a natural rhythm. You have more energy upon waking, less energy at the end of the day. You're supposed to fall asleep by 9, 10 o'clock at night, and you're supposed to actually be tired at night. And then you're supposed to wake up with your alarm clock or before your alarm clock with plenty of energy. Like, that's how our normal body should function. If you told me that was ever going to happen to me, really before the age of 27, I would have laughed. Like, I would have laughed because at 17, it wasn't happening. I mean, I was a chronic insomniac. It would take me hours to fall asleep. Some nights I would never fall asleep. And then all of a sudden, I fixed that. I turned that around. The body started to heal. Now, that wasn't the only thing. What I looked at, so the thyroid will tell, this is especially important for women. So many women out there, they don't know if it's a thyroid that's making them tired, their adrenals that are making them tired. Well, the two go hand in hand. I've done many shows on this. If you haven't heard my shows on thyroid before and how it's affected by the adrenals, please go to stevencabral.com/podcast. Simply type in thyroid, all right? You will find plenty of shows on the thyroid. It will literally teach you how to get well from low thyroid, weight gain issues, all of that. Today's episode is stevencabral.com/podcast. CFIDS.com/894. Go back, check out those shows. It will teach you how to do that. Okay. So, but here's the thing. If you understand the 10 levels of adrenal-based fatigue, what I want you to look at is on that thyroid adrenal hormone test, it's to look at your DHEA and testosterone levels, both men and women. If you have low levels of DHEA, declining levels of cortisol, meaning like cortisol looks okay, but low normal, we can see that your body's actually dropping. Like it's towards the last stages of adrenal resistance before it gets an adrenal fatigue. You no longer have the androgens to keep up, right? You have lower levels of DHEA, probably declining levels of testosterone. Really important to look at. The problem is women with PCOS, the testosterone can actually start to increase. Lower levels of cortisol, lower levels of DHEA, lower levels of progesterone, normal levels of estrogen. I mean, really higher levels of insulin, or at least insulin desensitivity. This is a recipe for PCOS, a recipe for endometriosis, a recipe for amenorrhea. So like when you look at that, we're able to run this one lab test. Again, weight gain issues. This is the lab test. We look at your vitamin D levels. Low vitamin D corresponds with a lot of these things. It's the lab test. Like it is the lab test. You can run it with us just through, again, I'll link it up at stevencabral.com/894, or run it with your local functional medicine practitioner that specializes in this. You cannot have someone that doesn't specialize in it because they're going to look at your numbers and be like, oh, well, it shows up at normal ranges, but they need to know about the DHEA, the testosterone. It's about ratios as well. It's about ratios. It's always about ratios. Traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, they'll teach you about balance. That's why, if you're a young doctor right now and you're a young naturopathic doctor and you haven't studied yet Ayurveda, you haven't studied TCM, you haven't studied that the body is not about, it's not about moderation. It's not about numbers. It's always about balance. Again, so the next greatest test right here is a hair tissue mineral analysis if you're suffering from fatigue. Why? Because it's all about balance. You'll understand that copper balances zinc, or zinc balances copper, right? Magnesium balances calcium. So again, if you have really high levels of calcium on a hair tissue mineral analysis, it doesn't mean you're taking in too much calcium, right? That's not what it means. It means that there's a higher level of excretion of calcium. Why would that be? But typically, potentially because of stress, right? Well, what does magnesium look like? Is it within balance? Is it that ratio of 6.67 to 1 from calcium and magnesium? These are numbers that you need to know. Again, sodium to potassium is at about a 2.5 to 1 ratio. Because if it's not, well, you're potentially going to have the lightheadedness upon standing. There are ways to figure this out. There are ways to figure it out. I'm telling you right now that I was taught these things. I didn't come up with them. None of this is mine. My job is to assimilate everything. Thousands of books, years of study, travel all over the world. It's the only thing that's really unique to me. Unique to me is the protocols that I create from studying other people's brilliant forms of medicine. I didn't create the medicine. I don't think I'm that good to be able to create forms of medicine. What I do is I assimilate everything. I take everything because I judge nothing because my ego was shattered. It was very, very strong. Trust me. I thought I knew it all when I was 16, right? And then illness came, and then I thought I was getting better, and I thought I knew it all. No. Every relapse just literally just squished me down to the ground and flattened me out until I realized that I was nothing and that I knew nothing. And so what I did was I said, I'm open to everything. And every time I say no to something, it always comes back to bite me. So now I stay open to everything, even these ridiculous diets out there right now. I say, okay, why are people getting results from these ridiculous diets? And I look into it and I say, I understand. I understand why in the short term they're getting results. However, when I look at it from the long term, I see this has never played out in human history. It makes no sense for the long term. Short term, I understand. And I'll talk about some of those diets in the future as well. But when you run a hair tissue mineral analysis to get back on track, is that you can look at your electrolytes. Someone with deep fatigue, well, we'll put it this way. If you're in the alarm stage, I can see a 4 high in electrolytes. If you're in resistance, I'm typically going to see lower magnesium and depleted sodium to potassium. And if you're someone that's really getting into that adrenal fatigue, I'll see a 4 low on that electrolyte pattern. Why? Electrolytes stand for basically electricity, energy within the body. They get up and go. We know that. We give it to athletes, right? It makes sense. So here's the deal as well. On that hair tissue mineral analysis, I see all your minerals, and I also get to look at heavy metals, which can be constantly inflaming and wearing down your body. Now, the next of the big 5 that I'd recommend if we're doing these in order of importance is your organic acids test. Why? Well, that's looking at all your vitamins. Look at your vitamin C. If you don't know your vitamin C levels and you're depleted, well, your adrenal glands are going to suffer. Your adrenal glands are the largest utilizer of vitamin C. It's very, very important. It's also needed for your immune system, of course, right? And chronic fatigue sometimes stems from viruses. So, of course, we need vitamin C. Now, here's another big thing. Without me turning this into an hour show, I'm going to try to condense it right now. And again, I've done seminars on this. I've given almost 3-hour seminars on this particular topic. and just getting started. But what I want to do is I want to get you started. Today's a get started show on this, all right? So it's really, really important. But the organic acids test also looks at gut digestion from a candida perspective and from different levels of butyrates and butyric acid in the gut. We can look at that. We can look at C. diff, right? We can look at Clostridium difficile. If we see these things in the urine, we know that they escape from the gut wall. We're looking at some type of intestinal permeability. If your body's dealing with, a leaky gut with an increased intestinal permeability, which again wasn't even like 20 years ago, people laughed at me when functional medicine doctors said I might have that. They thought it was a joke. Now they're doing fecal transplants. That's why you cannot, conventional medicine doctors can only do what they're told. That's the bottom line. They cannot think outside the box. And again, I'm not coming down on conventional medicine doctors. I know how many MDs listen to this podcast. I'm not coming down on you because you know what? You're one of the 0.001%. You get it. You understand that there are so many different facets to medicine. Conventional medicine's amazing, but you're not going to fix anybody with chronic conditions unless you start using natural-based modalities. So the organic acids test looks at mitochondria. It looks at neurotransmitters. It looks at your B vitamins, your B12, right? Now we're talking about B12, B6. We're talking about folate. We can look at these things from a functional level, right? We can quantify that. We can put real numbers on it. We can give you data like, do you need these things? Yes or no? Really amazing. And then again, the rest of the big five are the food sensitivity test because I was eating foods like almonds and I was eating chicken and I was eating foods that my body was having immune reactions to. Well, guess what? It just starts to fill up the rain barrel, right? Starts to create more inflammation. It's one more thing that my immune system has to fight against. So that's why I did a food sensitivity test. And it helped. It helped. It wasn't the answer, but it helped. Everything helps. Like that's the thing. There's no silver bullet with chronic fatigue. That's the hard part is that I can't give you that. But what I can do is I can show you what your underlying deficiencies are, right? I had high levels of omega-6s. I had lower levels of omega-3s. I started taking some omega-3s and it helped. It helped. Everything helped. Everything was like 10%, 10%, 10%. And you know what? Over time, I got better by 10%, by 10%, by 10%. And that was the amazing thing. So when I look back months ago, I started to feel better. Little relapse, well, it's because I started doing this, this, and this. I started exercising too much, right? Because there's a lot of lifestyle associated with this as well. Meaning like people ask me kind of the endomorphic body type. I'm sluggish. I have fatigue. Is it just because I'm an endomorph? Like it's a really good question to ask. Like you get it. You understand Ayurvedic medicine. You understand body types. And I say, you know what? I don't know. Like we should maybe just push you hard in your workouts because that will get rid of that sluggishness. It will boost your dopamine. Like we might need to do that. Push your cortisol. But I need to look at your lab test to truly know if you're suffering from being an endomorph because an endomorph can be fatigued in this Western-based culture for sure. I see it all the time. I can look at gut issues, right? And then they ask me, should I do longer fast? Should I do like a day-long fast? And I say, if you're depleted, if your cortisol levels are low or you have really high levels of cortisol, not a good idea because your body's already under stress. Why would you want to put it under more stress? That doesn't make any sense. We love intermittent fasting in my practice, but we need to be smart about it. What I want to do is I want to get your body healthy. I want to get it strong so that I can ask it to be flexible when I ask it to exercise, when I ask it to maybe do some intervals, when I ask it to do some fasting. I want it to be strong, and so then it's better able to do that. And when it's better able to do that, then you get more benefits. So remember, like back in the day, I tried to do fast. I was just totally wiped out for the next 2 days. Like I'd even just I'm starting to feel better. Let me go in the gym and do a workout. And then I would literally get a cold. I would get so run down that I felt like I had the flu. I'd get a sinus infection. And that's because I started to get a little energy, but then I just used it all up. Like that was the thing. And so you have to understand where your body's at. Now today, we have amazing functional medicine lab tests. You're able to do these things. But you have to understand that even you have to understand this, that even if you're not able to afford a lot of these functional medicine lab tests, you could even start with just one to get started, whatever works for you, right? Or you could try to answer the questions meaning that, okay, I don't feel rejuvenated with a night's sleep, with a weekend of sleep, or even after a vacation. Okay, I probably have some deep-seated neurological and fatigue-based issues. What should I do? Well, right away, you want to start replacing your deficiencies, like storing them back up, right? And you want to start taking away your toxins. And that's why if you don't know what to do, we've developed programs to just help the people who can't do necessarily consulting with us, or they can't do a lab tested equilibrium nutrition. They can't do any of these things. I understand it and I want to be able to help. You can read the rain barrel effect. You can do I just want you to move forward in some particular fashion. If you're able to do a smoothie in the morning, I truly do recommend the daily nutritional support powder or the Dr. Cabral daily protocol. Literally, we created it We took out the middleman to make it less than $5 a day to get all three of those products. Now, you might, though, your body might be so fatigued, your liver might be so overwhelmed that you can't even handle that. So what you need to do, and again, I don't want to turn this into a whole separate show, you might want to just start with half a scoop of it, literally half a scoop, so that you can build yourself up so that your body can actually know what to do with all these great vitamins and minerals. Because sometimes people react like, I don't know why, like I know my body needs it. Well, it's overwhelming because believe it or not, to digest all of these great foods, to digest the broccoli and the cauliflower and the Brussels sprouts and all these great foods, you actually need energy. And your body's depleted right now. So that's why I love smoothies and I love soft foods and I love warming foods like oatmeal and I like cooked vegetables and cooked root vegetables. So what I'll do in the future is I'll go over different nutrition plans for people with fatigue. But I just want you to know that there is an answer. The bottom line, there's always an answer. It took me many years for me to get my answer. I'm not upset about it. I was very upset at the time. Made me angry. And then I would go through periods of depression and anxiety that I would never get well. And then I went through periods of just really strong anger, like why can't anybody help me? Or why did this happen to me? But the truth is this, that I'm a stubborn individual. I really am. And I have that pitta-based personality. So I was challenged. With, am I going to get well? Or how long am I going to be held down? This isn't the life that I wanted. And I want you to bring that out in yourself. Because when I did that, I started to read. I started to just go back out there after I would relapse. And I said, okay, who am I going to meet with next? What am I going to do? What's the next product I'm going to try? And I would just keep literally trying to run through those walls. Well, here's the nice thing, is that I found practitioners out there who were able to get me these lab tests that I needed, who were able to pinpoint what I was deficient in and what my toxicities were. After that, as they say, I was off to the races. I want to see if I can do that for you. If I'm able to, I'm going to link up all those labs today at StephenCabral.com/894 so that you can either run them with us. I'm the one who actually reviews those labs. And then you speak with one of my health coaches that you get my plans, our recommendations, of course, our support. And a call comes with that because I want you to do that coaching call so that you understand where you're at, what your results mean, that you're just not saying, oh, they're in normal range, but we actually want to give you a protocol based on those results. And of course, if you don't want to do them within my practice, I totally understand that as well. And I'm totally fine with that. Like, I want people to understand that. But what I want you to then do is work with a local practitioner if you feel more comfortable and say, I want to run these labs. And here's why. Because now you have the knowledge. You have the power behind being able to make educated decisions. I could talk about this literally all day. I need to stop. I want to respect your time. So as always, if this show is helpful, if anyone you know is dealing with these mystery-based illnesses and fatigue and joint pain and inflammation and chronic fatigue and insomnia and all these things, give them hope. There's an answer. Pass along this show to them. Thank you so much. Have an amazing day. I want to sincerely thank you for your support of this podcast. I couldn't do it without you, and I mean that. I truly do. I also want to make sure you knew that we now have multiple ways for you to find your answers to the most difficult health, wellness, weight loss, and anti-aging questions. You can find podcast-specific topics like thyroid, adrenal, hormones, sleep, digestion, Ayurveda, and many more at StephenCabral.com/podcasts that will then link you to your favorite Apple, Spotify, and other podcast players. Plus, all new podcasts and weekly exclusive video content is being added to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Stephen Cabral. And that's Stephen with a PH. Head on over and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the exclusive content. Lastly, if you've ever found any of my podcasts or books to be helpful, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a review on iTunes or your favorite media player for the podcast. Rating and subscribing to the YouTube and podcast allow me to reach more and more people and help spread my mission of healing throughout the world. Thank you again for being a part of this movement.